Hi and welcome to today's video. We're going to be taking a look at this magazine from October 1986. Now my understanding is that Topics Jaguar was an internal magazine for Jaguar staff, and this one is basically covering the release of the XJ40. And there is obviously a foreword from John Egan, I believe. Well, there is a little bit there anyway. Yep, chairman's message, so there is a bit from John Egan. That's basically giving a list of thanks to people that played a vital role in the development of the car. So the people that designed the car, who beavered through the night testing the cars and components, who struggled to bring all components, parts and fought for high standards of quality against late changes of design, who assembled the pilot build cars of such care and interest, who built the actual launch stock of cars and achieved the change over to main assembly tracks, who launched the cars to our dealers at Browns Lane, who launched the car to press up in Dunheld and the city at the London Hilton, who launched the car to ourselves with such devotion at the NEC, and last by no means least, to those who launched the car to our customers with our dealers throughout the country. In fact, all of the Jaguar team, thank you, John Egan. And there is a nice fold open of one of the initial run of cars. So there's a bit of introduction there, really sort of about changes to the market and investment. We then have a bit of information about the product range, the range of engines which are being used. The 3.6 had already seen service in the XJS from about 1983 or so, but new for the XJ40 was the 2.9 2-valve unit. And that was basically using one of the cylinder heads from the V12. I think it was the left-hand cylinder head from memory. So that had the May high-efficiency combustion chambers. It says here, funnily enough. It's the same block, but with a shorter stroke. Ooh, that's interesting. Yeah, the 2.9 litre version has the May high-efficiency combustion chambers. That'd be a really sad project, but I wonder if you could make a 3.6 by changing the crank. So you could have a weird 2-valve 3.6. That would be interesting. Now I need to find a 2.9 and a 3.6 crank. I used to have a couple of spare 3.6 litre engines, so it would be interesting to see if you could actually do that. There was originally, in the spec for development, reference to a 2.9 24 valve and a 3.6 12 valve. So a 12 valve version of 3.6 was potentially planned, but obviously they probably for cost reasons and to keep the engine range simplified, you had the 2.9 and the 3.6, 2.9 12 valve, 3.6 24 valve. A little bit about transmissions, mentions that the Jetronic gearbox is used, and mentions that the ZF gearbox is used for the automatic versions. Does go into quite a bit of detail about the all-new electrical system, and it does actually cover quite a bit about the engineering story, as you can see here. Does go into some detail about aerodynamics, space efficiency, controlling weight. Yeah, okay then. Fair enough, if you say so. Corrosion protection, apparently. I say laughing when I've got a 36-year-old one there with some corrosion, but not anywhere near as extreme corrosion as some that you saw in the early 2000s and late 90s. Realistically, mine, which is actually an early car, is surprisingly corrosion free, but a lot of that is down to the fact that I took on extensive rust proofing when the car came to me in 2002, and I've kept that rust proofing up over the years, and it hasn't actually been used in anger in a British winter since 2003. That was its last, certainly with me, that was its last winter. It hasn't been used in winter since. It may have been used in the winters of 2012, 13 and 14 when it went to Practical Classics, but again, I don't look at the mileage. They didn't exactly pile on the miles, so it was used sparingly as well during that time. Basically goes into the body structure, the new painting techniques. One of the interesting things actually was clear over base. So even on non-metallic finishes, they had a clear coat, which explains why the non-metallic finishes like mine never actually seem to oxidize. Goes into detail about the new front and rear suspension, the self-leveling system, which was not the best, but you know, it was a feature. The anti-lock brakes, which was based on an existing Bosch system. And then it goes into a bit about the TD wheel system and also yaw control. So this is something that you could sort of think is really associated with cars which have electronic stability programs and traction control, but in this instance the anti-lock braking system actually had yaw control. So if you braked, say, on a slippery surface whilst going around a tight bend, the anti-lock braking would balance the braking effort to the wheel which was slipping more than the other wheel on the car, if that makes sense. So whichever wheel had least grip would receive the benefits of the anti-lock braking system, and obviously it would actually sort of counter for well, physics. So in other words, body tilt, etc., cornering, all of that sort of stuff. That's why you can, not that you should, slam the brakes on in test conditions and the car will come to a halt. Slightly messy halt, but a relatively straight halt, so to speak. In other words, you're not going to end up going backwards for a hedge. So now a little bit more about the range of engines. The electronic engine management used on both engines. The Limp Home Rescue, which was a feature on the Lucas engine management that was used on the 3.6. And the 2.9 used a Bosch system. It was, to be exact, it was the Bosch EZF programmed electronic ignition system. And yeah, here we are. So, oh, it actually tells you how the shorter stroke is achieved on the 2.9. So the shorter stroke of 74.8mm demanded a new cast crankshaft of similar design and bearing size to the 3.6 litre version. Due to the made chamber, the 2.9 version also requires a separate head casting. Manifold 2 is special to the 2.9 version. The May combustion chamber, with its lean burn characteristics, works on the following principle. As the piston rises near the top of the compression stroke, it tends to squeeze the mixture under the inlet valve more than under the rest of the head. This forces the mixture, along with the guide channel, into a tangential jet action into the deep recess under the exhaust valve, which in turn provokes a very strong swirling turbulence, which very effectively speeds up the burning of the otherwise slow to ignite lean mixture. And it was that reason why there was a sudden jump in economy when they introduced this technology on the V12s. In other words, far more efficient combustion. That's right, yes. The LH Jetronic was used for the fuel injection on the 2.9s, and a Bosch EZF electronic ignition system was used. So LH Jetronic was used pretty much a similar sort of off-the-shelf technology to a number of other manufacturers. So the AJ6 in 2.9 form actually gives 165 brake horsepower, which was 4 brake horsepower more than the XK 3.4. And the 3.6, so that was the 2.9. The 3.6 gave, I think it was, if I'm going to guess, 225 brake horsepower and 245 pound-foot of torque. This is quite cool actually. It had on the Lucas system, it had 4 kilobytes of memory in the ECU, making possible a number of useful sophistications, which is quite cool. So high technology stuff for the late 80s. Even then, 4 kilobytes was quite small, but for a car, that's what still seems quite a lot. 7 separate microcomputers, depending on the model. Mine has a central processor, instrument panel, and cruise control, and both engine management ones. Doesn't have aircon or anti-lock braking. Bit of stuff about the various different connectors. Then you have some photos of the launch, and it goes into the whole sort of launch thing as well, which is quite cool. And really just covers all of the launch, which is quite nice. So there's launch to the police, and interestingly that sort of pre-launch police one's actually got a different steering wheel and dash setup. And also no wood. A little bit about the testing. So all of the testing took place. The first ever XJ40 there, which was passed off for production. And then bits about the various facilities that were being used. So yeah, covered in this was the different types of manufacturing, the different plants that they were using for manufacturing, and these different various manufacturing processes for each stage of the production of the car itself. A little bit more about the manufacturing, including the final assembly at Browns Lane, and the assembly process, production testing, and various craft skills which were employed. Here for the construction of the seats, and here for the construction of the wood trim that was used. Then we have a whole thing about sales and marketing, and interestingly this is projected sales figures worldwide for Jaguar as a whole. So by 1990 they hope to be selling nearly 70,000 cars a year, which is pretty good. And a couple of mock-up adverts for the XJ40. Then the last page is about, interestingly, about the diagnostic system that they used for the XJ40. You had these sort of diagnostic pods, you had the computer, you had a little keyboard, printer, management probe, current probe, really sort of all sort of standard test equipment these days, but certainly for this era this was all pretty new. Well, certainly in this sort of level of detail. Austin Rover had their fast check system, but this was a little bit more complicated because it was pretty much one setup for the whole car with different diagnostic pods, whereas fast check was different troubleshooting modules for each major electrical circuit. Now, interestingly, this was actually developed by a company called Cirrus. Now, if you remember back to the late 90s, early 2000s, Cirrus Logic produced certain PC hardware, most notably graphics cards, if I remember rightly. Anyway, final shot is another fold open, and that just covers a little bit more about the sort of various testing that the car went through, including the frame that was assembled to mock up the wiring loom. Also shown are a couple of shots there when it was being tested in the States, water testing there at Myra, and a couple of other bits and pieces. I think that was from the original promo video, actually, that particular shot there. And obviously crash testing and cold weather testing, well, simulated cold weather testing at, that was number, what's that, number 7? Yeah, over at Gaydon, or Myra at Gaydon. And there we are. A rather nice little addition to my XJ40 related collection, with something on the back. Is that something that can be removed, or no? That looks like just a gouge in the actual paper itself. Oh, that's annoying. Oh, how frustrating. It must have been there for a while. Anyway, there we go. So that's today's video. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.